This is a presentation of SBE 15, New York City.
I'm JP Cardoso. I'm a Northeast Regional Manager for LiveU. I work out of the Boston area. And joining me on in this presentation is Luis Munoz, who's our solutions engineer from the Central region. He's out of Texas. And Kevin Camusa, who is our regional solutions engineer for the Northeast, who's working out of New Jersey. So I wanted to give you a brief word about LiveU and where we're coming from. It'll make sense really quickly why we're doing the presentation we're doing today. So we are the largest provider of bonded cellular packs in the world. And so without reading anything here, any of you who have experienced LiveU in the field or saw our logo, they are usually on the back of a backpack. That backpack has a transmitter in it, and there's a camera plugged into the transmitter. And so what we do is we aggregate networks together to provide enough predictable bandwidth to move video and audio from a remote location back to the studio. And so we have more than 3,000 end customers, 25,000 units globally, and millions upon millions of live sessions happening all the time, and terabytes and terabytes of data moving at any given time. So, and as you can imagine, during the Olympics, this is a pretty peak time. We're moving a lot of data right now. And a quick view of our portfolio. We have a bunch of different transmitters that we offer, some that do more, like the LU800, which gives you 4 inputs, 4 SDI inputs, but all the way down to LU Smart, which is a little app that you can put on your phone and allows you to transmit video across a cell and Wi-Fi line back to a receiver in the studio. So we have this whole family of transmitters, encoders, decoders, and receivers, and then also a whole bunch of IP solutions, which are really cloud offerings. They range from something as simple as a tally light that you can run off of your transmitter to tell you if you're on air, all the way to LiveU Matrix, which is a complete distribution platform that allows any station anywhere to send video to any other station anywhere. So it's a real expansive array of tools, all geared towards live video. And it's funny when Jeff Conrad was telling you the title of the presentation today. You get into doing creating your presentation, and I realize, like, the title of my presentation is completely different from what I told you, but it's all dealing with the same stuff. So this is really live news orchestration in the time of COVID. In the time of COVID, and this is really one way of also introducing a new product that we've developed called Air Control, that was really born out of our experience with COVID and what happened around it. So I'd like to take us back in time to March 11th, 2020, when I think, this was the time when COVID all really hit home for us, especially in the media industry. And that's when the Oklahoma City Thunder and the Utah Jazz game got called off because someone tested positive for COVID. I remember I was driving home from work that night, and it just got my mind reeling as to the impact of this and where this was going. How is this going to affect the business that I'm in, and then of course the broader world. And so for television stations, when COVID hit, we had to scramble to respond. And some networks and stations moved to 90% or more remote operations in the span of weeks or even in a couple days. I think I understood that at the CBS facility, because they had several staffers test positive, they cleared that place out in a matter of 2 days. So this really put engineering to the test, and it also put operations to the test. And how do you work with these new tools in a new environment? And in all the major markets, actually the minor markets too, you had talent all moving home and basically doing the news from their living rooms or their dens. And it wasn't just talent that got thrown to the wind. Production staff also all got sent home, and they were having to do their jobs, whether they're a graphics operator or an audio operator or a TD. They're all having to press buttons from a remote location as well. So this really threw everything up into the air. So those that were lucky and those who had money, and that would be the larger 24-hour news networks, they did what they're used to. They sent a vehicle out to their high-priced talent's house, and that's how they got their feeds back to the studio and got the show on the road. This is what they had always done. This is what they were familiar with. And so it's what they did. That's what was at top of mind for them. And larger organizations are still doing this. There are still people at the major networks at places like Fox and CNN who are still actually doing their shots from their house. And they still have a vehicle outside their house moving moving the video and audio back.
A ton of our talent and radio is still working from home too.
Yep, exactly. A little less to deal with. You don't need quite as large a vehicle, but
True.
But most call letter stations and most of the smaller networks and even the larger ones, they had to do something different for the vast majority of their talent and staff that had left the house, and so, or had left the studio. And LiveU, if you think about the products that we create, we were already enabling video and audio to move from the field into the studio without needing any hardwired internet. Our technology became very, very relevant when this happened. So let's talk about this. So we have, let's say, an anchor who you sent home. At the very, very basic, you have a camera that's pointed at the anchor, and you need to get that camera to the studio so you can get it on air. An anchor, of course, is not just a reporter in the field. They're working from a script. So you also have a teleprompter, and so they need something to read. How are you going to connect this back to the studio where it can be brought to air? Well, you can use the network that's in the house, and certainly there are protocols that can move video and audio across a network and back to a studio. And there are products for prompting that allow you to open up an app, even on an iPad, and allow you to feed prompt back to a remote location over IP. But the problem with this is that the timing is very it's very unpredictable. The latency can vary widely depending on the quality of network that you have. So what many of our customers did is employ our transmitters as the conduit between the camera and the studio. And the way that we work is that we use the network that's there in your house, whether it's Wi-Fi or a hardwired Ethernet. But we also have the added redundancy of bonded cellular as a backup to that connection. So that if something happens to your primary network, the bonded cell, those cell connections kick in. And it's actually something, when I was doing demos in person, that I loved to do, where if you hook up to someone's network in their house, you plug in an Ethernet cable and you're running a transmission and it's all going great. And then during the demo, I'll go and just unplug the Ethernet cable without telling anyone, and nothing happens. the transmission keeps on going. And if you look at our metering, you'll just see all the cell networks fill in to fill the void. So it's a nice way of providing built-in redundancy. And the added benefit is that it also provides return video going the other way. So from the studio, you can send video back through the transmitter, in this case in the form of a teleprompter to a monitor that the anchor can view. And so there's everything that the anchor needs, almost. So you do have audio. I know there are a lot of radio people, and video people tend to give audio short shrift, but you do need to feed audio in. That's typically done whether it's through an adapter or a mixer directly into the camera, and then sent into the transmitter as a single connection. So that's usually over embedded SDI connection, although you could also do it on HDMI. The anchor also has to hear from the studio, though. So they have to hear their prompts from the studio. So there's also IFB return coming back the other direction. So at our receiver in the studio, there are inputs for mix minus audio that go back to the anchor. They wouldn't be wearing those big headsets, but it's easier to see. And these transmitters are very flexible. So in the case of the LU800, you can even add multiple cameras. So if you did want multiple angles, you could do that. And in the case of sports, these transmitters are used to feed multicam back to a studio. You can do up to 4. And as I was creating this, there's always other stuff that I forget that runs over the transmitter itself. For instance, some of our customers were, instead of putting fixed cameras in their anchors' homes, they were putting pan-tilt zoom cameras. And so we have another stream of data that runs over the transmitter that can actually carry protocol data, so that you could control your pan-tilt zoom remotely, or whether it's from the studio or whether the camera operator is maybe in their own house somewhere. It does provide that conduit. So what this does is dramatically simplify setting up a studio in a remote location, not just doing a 30-second live hit. So that is one element of doing the evening news from remote locations, is setting up your talent to succeed. You can also put all of this technology into a truck, and you can add additional layers of redundancy that way. So you can add satellite, IP satellite, and IP microwave capability, and that provides yet additional networks that our transmitter can access. So that's just increasing the odds that you're going to have a successful transmission. And that's what this is all about. It's about making it as likely as possible that the live hit is going to be successful. So any questions thus far? I think I see some nodding heads, so we'll continue along the way. I don't think this is, I'm telling you much that you haven't seen before. Just trying to put this all in context. Now, of course, I just got done telling you you don't need a vehicle, so let's move along those lines. So when you're doing a news broadcast, or even, let's say, a panel show, you're often inviting guests in to contribute. And especially in COVID, there are all these scientists and doctors and public health experts that you're trying to feed into the news so they can share their information. In the before times, before COVID hit, there were really 2 ways that you could get these done. So one was you send out a camera crew to shoot the talent in the field. And another way is to use something like Skype. And Skype, which had cut its teeth on really teleconferencing, they added, I'm sorry, I just had some ticking in my ear here. They added the ability to actually be able to take a Skype call and get an SDI output into a switcher. So if you go into a lot of television stations, you'll see a rack mount Skype server. Essentially, it's a receiver that can take the feed in from the guest. And for the guest, all they're doing is they're running Skype on their laptop. So it's nothing special that they need to know about. But when COVID hit, all of a sudden you had all these additional experts who were needed, none of whom were really using Skype. And so what happened is Zoom, Teams, Cisco, all this teleconferencing gear came to the fore. And so these tools were already familiar to the contributors, so it wasn't much of a leap for them to use. And we could figure ways out in the engineering world to rasterize that image and get it into the switcher and be able to actually take it as a shot. The downside was that you usually had to use a third-party device to rasterize that image. And what that leads to is slight mismatches in delay, both on audio and on video. So usually this was a case of, this is good enough. And certainly the talent liked it because it's what they're used to doing all the time. But it was one of those compromises, I guess, that engineering had to make. Now, remember, it wasn't just the talent and the guests who are outside the studio now, it's the production staff itself. So how do you maintain communication between the production staff when your TD's in one place and your graphic operators in another and your audio's in another, the director's in another place? Well, I have to say there are about as many solutions to this as I have customers. So sometimes they would use something like Unity to really bring intercom functionality to all these remote locations. Sometimes they would just use a traditional phone bridge, a conference bridge. And then sometimes, a lot of the time, these television stations would turn to teleconferencing gear like Zoom, Teams, and Cisco. And this, again, you run into questions of different timing and different levels of quality. So when you actually get into a production, things start to get hairy. When you have your production team on one platform, your guests on another, maybe a couple live shots coming in on backpacks, maybe one coming from a truck, and then a couple anchors who are thrown out in the field, and then your weather guy who's doing God knows what. So things got particularly hard, I think, for the TD and the director in trying to conduct all this stuff. And so managing COVID was often cartoonish. So the TD is communicating with the guests in the field and saying, well, the poor guy who writes books for a living is like, I use the phone to hear the TD, but my teleprompter's on an iPad. What's that all about? And then why is the video choppy? And so all of a sudden the TD is having to explain technology to the person on the other end. And then you have the weather guy who's out here who's like, look, I got all these devices. I got 2 phones, an iPad, a laptop, but they're all running at slightly different delays from the studio return. So help me. How do we solve these problems and how do we get better? So the core challenges, I think that operations and engineering did an amazing job in cobbling together these solutions in such a short time frame, but we're still like wrestling with some of these issues going forward. One is the problem of alphabet soup. You're dealing with so many different products and platforms, all that sort of run their own way, and they don't always match. And you're also running into the problem of dissonance between corporate or prosumer tools like Zoom and Teams, and then true broadcast tools like LiveU packs. And then there's, of course, the real task of managing communication between people with various technical abilities, coming from very different places, and then also very, very different hardware setups. And then you also have to deal with production staff that are still displaced. We're already, like we heard before, there are still stations running this way to a greater or lesser extent. And I think the biggest thing that especially engineering has to keep an eye on is variable transmission quality and also latency. How long does it take for the return feeds to get back to their talent? How long does it take if someone's in a conversation with an anchor, like how long does it take that round trip to happen? So you know, is the amount of delay, is it noticeable? Or is it good enough? So that's where we've come up with air control. I didn't realize this was stepped. So, so our idea is to, instead of having this big bucket of alphabet soup of different products, try to unify communications across all these different platforms and all these different people and functions, and use our platform, which is very well suited for remote connection to get this done. So the end result here is that we want our TD to be able to just say, yes, you got what you need right in front of you, to the talent, to the guests, to the reporters in the field. So what is air control? Actually, before I get into this product I'm introducing, any questions or comments, or do you want to just leave those to the end? Yeah, we'll just keep on rolling.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So air control is really what we call an orchestration tool. So it's been designed to allow a station to orchestrate shows of any size with the people and the devices they already have. So it works for everyone in a station. So it's for engineers, editorial, your anchors, your reporters, announcers, and even your guests. And really the whole idea is to, at once, remove risk and complexity, particularly for talent who you want to keep things as clean as possible, and make the product as usable as possible. So it really combines the power of LiveU's reliable transport protocols, which we use to move video from point A to point B, to also get you to air without the need to download anything, basically to just use a browser, to use all your existing infrastructure to get this done, to not have to add any hardware, to get all of your staff and your talent and your guests on the same collaboration platform, all at around a half-second latency. And then also to quickly and easily scale a production from a simple cut-in to a full-fledged news broadcast or a panel show. So the way we're doing this is actually working on two different levels. So the machine to machine level is basically just that idea of the LiveU pack in the field, taking video in and moving it to a receiver in the studio. So the machine to machine live signals are already handled. That's not what air control is doing. What air control is doing is adding a layer which facilitates communication between the production staff and the talent and the guests. So this extends to, like I said, the guests, to reporters who have their LiveU packs in the field, to anchors who are using LiveU in their house, or maybe even using a different encoder. And then air control UX, which is basically just a web way to communicate with directors, producers, MCR operators, who might all be in different locations. So the way that we do this is that based on login, so everyone has a login to this environment, you have a different view. So at the simplest level, if you are a guest who's going to be introduced to a news program or a panel show, you get an invite, you click on the link inserts you into the show, and there you go. There are no buttons on this. It's just a window that has a monitor of what's happening in the studio, and then a small window that can show how you're framed in the shot to make sure you're being seen properly. We want to give a guest as little to do as possible. And so they basically have one line of communication coming from the studio into their ear, and then they just have their video and audio being fed to our receivers. So it's a very, very simple, very pared down way of viewing communication within a broadcast. It's also providing the means to actually get their video back into the studio as well. So it is handling transmission. Now, for an anchor, they have different requirements. So they need to be able to access intercom or IFB, and they also need to see teleprompter coming back. So what we can do is provide them a couple more windows in their view, one of which is a return feed coming back from the studio that has their prompter. And then they also get a little window that shows what the program feed looks like. And then, of course, a window that shows what their own camera framing looks like. And the difference here is that they actually have a button so they can enable talkback to intercom, to the production staff. So again, very, very simple. Pared down. You don't want any extra stuff on there for the anchor to do. But also it provides a single focal point for them, so that they're not darting their eyes all over the room to different monitors. It's all in one place. Now, when you move to the production staff, things get a little more full-featured. So a producer or an MCR view is going to get views of all their feeds, or all the feeds they want to access, but it also gives them access to different, basically rooms that they can communicate with. So you have down below your on-air talent. That's one room and one node of communication. They also have listen and talk to the production booth, and then they also have PFL talk and program audio that they can feed to different guests. The nice thing here is that you can set up different series of guests in different green rooms so that they can actually interact amongst themselves before they actually go to air. So there's a fair bit of flexibility here to control who is talking to whom, and when something is promoted to on air. I want to keep clear, this is not a switcher. This is not like an online switcher or anything like this. This is a means to facilitate communication between the production team, talent, and guests. I think sometimes when people see this graphic, this MCR view, they're like, "Oh, it's like a multi-view switcher," and that's not really what's happening here. This is instead a form for communication. And then you have alternate views, in this case for let's say the TD, communication with the production booth, and then all your guest users. And in this case, you're just seeing preview and program, and then maybe the prompter and a roll-in coming from off air that will eventually get taken to air. So we're providing different layouts depending on function, and depending on what people need to get done. So where we're seeing this getting rolled out initially is really just for guest management. So for stations that are just trying to manage people who don't have any specialized equipment at home and how to best introduce them to a broadcast. And so in this case, what happens is we send, like you, if you're the production coordinator, you send a link to the guest, they click on the link, it automatically opens up that communications channel, and then that feed is introduced to one of our receivers. And the great thing about this is that when you communicate this way, everything is unified. You're not adding a letter to the alphabet soup. You're already in an environment that you're using. So it's essentially a way to replace Zoom, Skype, FaceTime for getting live video from remote computers to the station. If you look at this in a more full-fledged system overview, then you get into how we can control the entire production environment. So not only can we add guests to a show, but we can also preview and see and communicate with, which is the most important thing, all your packs in the field, all your thin and thick clients, so basically software, web clients, and hardware that's in the field, and introduce them to air control so that they can all communicate in the proper context. What happens in the studio is that all gets run from our LiveU server into your production infrastructure, into your switcher, your audio mixer, your router. And then finally, if you are sending return information back, that's fed into a LiveU return video server and gets fed back into air control. So we're at 6:53. So I think what I'd like to do is hand control over to Luis, who can actually show you how this works briefly, and then we can just open it up to questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Conrad, if you could give control over to Luis.
I'm going to defer that to Jeff since he's
okay.
he's in control.
Yep.
So Luis, you're muted too, just so you know.
Sorry. Yeah, I've already got control. All right, guys. So I've already got control. Everybody should be able to see my my desktop. No.
No, I'm just seeing you.
Oh, let me hit. I gotta hit share. All right. Here we go. Okay, so what I'm showing here is basically our video return portal. So video return portal is basically everybody, you know, the LiveU customers will have a video return server, and in that is what you kind of the way that we send your program video out from the station to the guest, right? So if you have video that as a prompter video, then you would feed the prompter video into our video return, one of these channels. And then that's where you determine determine what you're going to feed. So from here, you could kind of select, okay, here's what I want to do. So I'm going to go back into my air control. So this is the air control UI here. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to create the actual show. So here's where I basically create a show. So I'm just going to start here. So the idea, as JP mentioned, is kind of you're going to simplify everything on our end, so that when the customer or when the guest receives the link, they don't have to determine, you know, am I going to send them 1080p, 1080i, 720p, whatever it is, right? So here's where you would determine, okay, it's, you know, 720p, 5994. You set the delay, the latency, the duration of the show. You set a pre-show and a post-show duration. So if you can, in advance or prior to the show starting, you could get everybody on there. That way you could actually, you know, do testing and so forth, and then post show as well if you want to finish up with that. So now once you set up the show, you can kind of come in here, and as I mentioned earlier, these are all your feeds here. So here's basically what I'm going to choose the feed that I'm going to be sending to the guest. So as an example, I'm going to send DAO control B, right? So I go in here and I'll just select DAO control B if I have it in here, or I select any one of these other ones. And then on the prompter feed, if I have a prompter feed, I can select that as well. And I can tell it if it's a quad layout or a dual channel layout, I can select it down here, right? So, and I just simply select which one I want to be able to show. Like I have the UMD display here as well, so I can do program and prompter on this side if I wanted to. Oops. Right, and then I hit save. In this particular case, we just need a single layout, right? So I'm just going to send that, and I'm just going to do program. Right, and then I'm going to hit save here. And here's where I select the channel. So everybody that has, if you have a LiveU system already, you would basically select the channels that you want to use, that you want to be able to send the video to from your guest. And on here on the users, you can select everybody that you want to be able to attend on here, but you don't necessarily have to now. And in the participants, if you have a list of all your participants, this is kind of the list of everybody all your guests. Right, so if you have the mayor, the governor, whatever it is, you just put his information in here, his or her information in there. And you would add them to the live participants, and then this is the invitation they would receive. So it's a really simple invitation. Now, our next version is going to allow you to actually edit that and modify the actual invitation of the body of the invite. But for now, we'll just kind of continue moving on here with this. So now what I'm doing is I'm launching the show, right? So now, as JP was mentioning earlier, so up here on the top left, I have all the guests, right? So I haven't invited any guests yet. Now down here on the bottom is where I have the production booth. So these are all the actual employees of the station, right? So currently I have myself. So Kevin, if you don't mind logging in and joining that room so that we can see you down here on the bottom. So currently, notice here it says could not initialize camera. So basically, what's happening here is the actual air control utilizes the camera and the microphone that's on your laptop. So when you have that, because we have Zoom already taking control or has control of your camera, this kind of makes it a little bit of a challenge to do this. But if I go in here, oops, selected the wrong one. So I go in here and go to settings. I can select the camera, right, accordingly, and then the microphone as well, right? So you can select whatever microphones you have, and so forth. So anyway, and then I have a preserve the PL. See, these are all just settings that you can utilize. But anyway, so once I have a guest, okay, Kevin, I'm going to send you an email.
Okay.
So it's Kevin Camusa. Maybe I spelled your name here.
It's Kevin C at LiveU.
Kevin C at LiveU.tv. Right. Oops, I put that on the. I'll just put guest. Right. I'm not gonna do that. And then here I'll just put mine on there. It doesn't really matter. Okay. Yep.
Get rid of the 1 in front of the 2 and 4.
Oh, there it is. That's what it is. I'm missing something here. Try that again. Kevin. Guest. Kevin, see? Yeah, something's not right with this. It's not. It's disabled for some reason. But the idea here.
Address book now.
I'm sorry.
I am in the address book now. I should be.
Are you?
Should be.
Okay. Yeah, but it's not sending out emails for some reason. It's disabled for whatever reason. But anyway, so the idea would be that he would join on this as a guest user. So once he's on here, there's a PFL, which is a pre-fade listen, right? So I can talk to him, and down here on the bottom, if I hit the pre-fade listen, if I hit listen or talk, I can actually talk to each individual person that's on the list. And now once they're on there, it's just a matter of dragging and dropping into each individual channel that I have here. Now the view that Kevin would have would be exactly what JP was actually showing, which was the kind of the picture-in-picture look where you have the actual video. But this is essentially it on as far as what we actually see on the with actually just using taking the actual guest to air. Is really it's just a matter of just dragging and dropping. Unfortunately, I can't do that now since I can't send them the invite. But essentially, that's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot to it other than that. Any questions so far?
So there was one question that came across the chat that so a guest needs to click on the link to open communication, and they're asking if there's a way to initiate communication from the guest to the production studio. And I believe
yes.
that.
So
Okay.
the mic that's on the guest, their mic is always going to be on, right? So we can actually, so anytime that they speak, we'll be able to listen here. So notice here you have the listen and the talk here, so we can go both ways. So that's kind of the way you communicate back and forth with the guest. It's going to be through here. Now once we send them to air, that's when the intercom functionality kicks in. With what we call Audio Connect, right? So Audio Connect is really what is what the guest is going to, if he has either a headset on or on his laptop, he'll be able to hear the anchor or whoever else that's going to be on the line. Will be able to also communicate with them accordingly as well, right? So they'll be always able to communicate whether they're in the kind of in the guest user mode or if they're in the on the air mode when they're currently on the air.
I see it. And then there was a follow-up question. Do you have to send out emails every time, or are there new guest links for every show?
Yes. So there's so once you're in the actual show, we can actually remove you from this list. So once you get removed from the show, then we'd have to resend you another link to be able to get back into the show. So that link isn't always going to be on. It's just kind of it's only based on the usage of this particular show.
It's a one-time, it's a one-time.
Right. Now, if you get out, if you were to maybe you reboot your computer or whatever, and then you can actually still continue to use that as long as we didn't kick you out. Then you'll be able to, as long as we either didn't kick you out, or if the time of obviously the show didn't expire, then you'll still be able to get back in. Once you get kicked out of the show, then you'll need to get another link to get back in.
So it's very much controlled centrally, as opposed to outside people initiating communication.
Exactly. So the idea is here you have these 4 servers, right? These are the same 4 servers that you would have inside LU Central, right? So inside LU Central, you have all your channel, all these channels are the same channels that you have here. This is kind of where I selected. I was like, I want these 3 channels or these 4 channels. This is basically where I selected these 4 here as well, right? So it's the exact same one. So basically, it makes it easier. It's you're integrating both your existing backpacks that you have along with with all your current with the host or the guests that you have that are on this that you're going to take to air.
Yep.
So
and so.
This,
go ahead.
I was going to ask, is this all cloud-based, or do you have hardware at the stations?
So at the stations, we're going to have hardware. So it's going to be the video return server and the MMH server, which is the server that because those have an SDI output, and that's what they plug into their switchers, right? And it's an embedded audio, video with embedded audio. So that's what they take into the switchers, and they're able to switch. So they have multiple photographers out or reporters out in the field. They're able to take all those simultaneously, send them in, and then they'll just switch between all those 4. So now once you're sending that feed out, which JP was mentioning is the matrix workflow, and that's basically once everything is kind of a already produced show, and you're sending that out, and you're going to be able to stream that out. And if you want to share it with other affiliates, as an example, like CNN content or sister stations, right? Then you would be able to send that content out and share that out with everybody else across the world.
Yeah, and actually going back to the question from Jake, so So he was responding that if for a daily show with a remote host, you'd have to set this up and send out a new email with new links every day. That's actually not really true. You can save it, and if you have talent that's showing up every day, I think it would be preferable actually to have an actual encoder on site, or even one of our software encoders. So you can run, for instance, LiveU Smart off of an iPad, in which case you're not having to send an email to someone to initiate them. This is really just to initiate them into the show if they're just using the thin
kind of an
web
occasional,
client.
occasional,
Yeah, it's occasional
users.
use, exactly.
Yeah. So there's also another. It's a good point. Is there's all we'll have a thin client and a thick client. So the thin client is basically the browser based. Now, if you're somebody that's constantly on the show, then you would actually have the thick client, right? So it'd be you would install the app on your computer, on your tablet or your laptop. And then in that case, then it would be a lot easier to get in. So then in that case, you don't have to be receiving an invite. The actual thin client is for those that are not always on guests, always guests on this particular show. So they could receive invites from anybody from any other station as well. So in this, but that's kind of the idea between the thin client and the thick client, which is the app based one.
Do we have any other questions for the guys at LiveU? Okay. Any last comments, gentlemen?
No. So thanks a lot, Jeff and Conrad for having us in. I will distribute my contact information. So if you're interested in taking a look at air control or our core technology of transmission packs, please reach out to me. And yeah, thanks a lot for the opportunity.
We're gonna post this video on our website, and I'll put a main contact number there as well.
Excellent.
Well, we certainly appreciate you taking the time this evening to present to us. That's a fascinating technology, and clearly what we're seeing. You mentioned that a lot of the talents are still at home. Even as the pandemic wanes, we're still seeing people that now that's their new thing.
Yeah.
So
no, absolutely. It's I think, I mean, people talk about it in regular corporate life. Working from home is I think a new production reality, because we can.
And it seems like you have the right tools for people to use to do that. So
hi.
Again, thank you.
Could I ask a question?
Please.
Sure, of course.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about NDI. I saw the NDI in your slide as one of the protocols that you guys support. That was on that big complicated slide with all the block diagrams on it. Could you say a few words about that, and you control things over NDI through your system?
So what we do with NDI is we're able to decode an NDI or output an NDI out of our servers, right? So you have everything, all your cameras that are out in the field, and when we send it to our decoder or to our receiver at the station, that will be able to decode an NDI output, and then that obviously from there, then you could send it out to whatever devices that are able to pick up an NDI stream.
So this solution works for people that are just using NDI as well as using 2110.
Right. Yeah. So 2110 is obviously a different one. So which is requires a different device, which is a 2110 server. But yeah. But the actual equipment that we have now is actually will actually output either an SRT or NDI output or RTMP, or obviously the SDI output as well. So but yeah, so that one particular server that we have, that one does everything except for the 2110 output.
So you could read the feed from a Makito encoder or something like that into your server?
So again, we're only outputting that as an NDI output, right? So when we're taking the stream from a camera, right, and an SDI camera that's out in the field, we take that into our server, right? Or what we call an MMH server, and then we output that. It's going to be it would be outputted as instead of an SDI output, it would be an NDI output, right? So then you could take that output and broadcast that output to wherever you want to send it to your
So
switcher.
then back in the facility, it becomes SDI or whatever else the facility needs on the output of your service. Back
if you have a TriCaster or whatever, right? So we would basically send that output to a TriCaster, and then the TriCaster would be able to pick up that NDI signal.
All right, that's really cool. Anyway, thanks for answering all my questions, Luis.
Sure.
It's been a long time since I've talked to you.
Yeah, it's been a while. Still have your art.
Yeah, I'm retired, but I'm having a good.
Good.
All right. Any other questions?
Well, we know that the transmitter packs, I don't know why they call them transmitter packs, they're bidirectional, right? I would call them transceivers. They do 4 cameras, but the receivers, how many, are they unlimited or they're limited to 4 each receiver?
They're limited to 4. But I mean, you can get them as few as 1 if you want for a small facility. But yeah, they're 4. So they have 4 SDI outputs on them.
At the studio side.
At the studio site, yep.
Right.
Thanks for joining us. Please remember to subscribe to SBE 15 New York City.